So let's get started. Our first speaker is Flavie Laurus from the BRE, the Building Research something. Sorry, I've lost track of that a bit. And Flavie's been working for a couple of years on biophilic design in an office environment. She's going to talk to us a bit about biophilia, what it means in real terms in a building, and the importance of considering the occupants. So Flavie, over to you. 10 minutes, and I'm afraid if you do run over, I will cut you off.
That's all right. Yes, the BRE is the Building Research Establishment. Thank you very much.
Establishment. Sorry, the word
fine,
just completely left me.
So I'll try to share my slide. So you should be. Can you just confirm you can see? Do you see them?
That's great. Thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, because it's always tricky to know where you can see. Anyway, so thank you very much for inviting me today. I was just going to give a very quick presentation about biophilia and what it means for the built environment. And it's something that, you're right, we've been considering and exploring for a couple of years now. Very often in the built environment, we consider a great environment by looking in terms of indoor air quality, lighting, ventilations, overheating, and acoustics solutions, and etc. And it's true, those are very important. But other factors that could be considered are color. Often comes as a bit of a second kind of last minute decisions. If there's some access to daylight, that's great, and it's often taken into consideration where possible. A view to the outside is interesting, and it's great if it can happen. But what we sometimes end up with is an office that looks like that, which I think you'll all agree is not exactly very exciting, although it does meet all the standards that it needs to. It's just that very often we apply all the right standards and the right metrics, but then we just put the corporate colors inside the building, and then we put as many occupants as possible. So why is it important? Well, it's a topic, health and well-being in offices, and it's a topic that's been around for a little while.
Joining.
And this is a diagram that comes from the World Green Building Council report that was published a few years ago, but it's often quoted. But I think it's quite interesting because we do have a lot of focus on the energy costs and reducing those, and that's very important in terms of greening the built environment. But actually, if we look into where costs come from in an office-based environment, 90% come from staff. So we think that it should be an important issue to consider. We are also living in a world that's becoming increasingly more and more urbanized. There's statistics that show that about 66% of the developed world will be urbanized by 2050. We also spend 90% of our time indoors on average. And on the other end, we also know that there are some statistics that are showing that stress-related illnesses are on the rise. The WHO forecast that it would be the primary cause for sickness by 2020 now. Might have changed in the current climate, unfortunately, but it's still something that's very important. Other studies have shown that 47% of offices globally shown to have no access to natural light. 58% have no access to plants. And the report where these figures come from, which is from Human Spaces, states that 66% of workers in the UK report to have no access to natural daylight, which is quite interesting. We also know that when we're exposed to distracting noises, that drops our performances. If the office is too hot, too cold, it also affects our performances. But what I think is interesting on this slide is the fact that if workers that have got access to a window and a view to the outside have been shown in their study to have, on average, 46 minutes more sleep per night. And we know sleep is very important for regenerating. So what is biophilia? Biophilia is a term that has been around for a little while, but more widely used since the definitions by Edward O. Wilson, that came about 30 years ago now. And it's basically our genetic connection to nature. And it's not, biophilia is not about building a forest in your office. Biophilia is about how you think about the principles of nature and how you can start bringing them back into an office. So considering that nature is diverse, that there's a flow of air that is different to the indoors, that we have different colors and sounds and textures, and also the aesthetics is very important. There's been some studies that have been carried out, some case studies from around the world that show that in offices, there is a 15% increase in levels of well-being, productivity and creativity is also increased where there are some biophilic principles that have been applied. In schools, some case studies have shown that children can learn better when they and faster when they've got access to natural lights. And plants also seem to have an improvement on their ability to learn. Green walls might have some improved performances in terms of CO2 levels, acoustics. But overall, some studies have shown that there was some reduced absenteeism and some benefits. And this one is a study that I found is quite interesting, where, again, it's another study that showed that in the healthcare sector, that the patients that had access to a view to the outside, and I'm talking a view to the outside on trees and nature, and not on the back courtyard with with the rubbish bins, but you know, some greeneries, have the ability to recover faster. They require less medications and they feel less pain. So there are some benefits. So what we're interested in BRE is to really understand how can we gather more evidence to really understand what it is that makes a difference. What is it that really improves the well-being of people, and how make sure that this create a study that is relevant to the UK and relevant to and it's a long-term study, apologies. So what we've been looking at is to understand how biophilia and its principles can help with well-being, productivity, and in the office environment. The project team is as follows. So as I say, it's not all about plants. We've got biotextures and ambience that provide plants and greeneries in the office, but we've also been working with interface, and that's floor covering, so looking into different patterns and creating sections of the offices. Axonobel, because that's Dulux and they provide colors. Ecofen, from Saint-Gobain, they provide acoustic solutions, so it's all to do with the sounds, and Plantronics, who provide soundscaping. But we've also been working with Waldman, a German company, looking into biodynamic lighting. So how do you look into lighting systems that change color and intensity throughout the day to ensure that you replicate a bit more closely what happens in real life on the outdoors. And Coelux, which is an Italian company that have got a basically an artificial view of the sky, which is a very interesting system. And we've also got GVA, which now are called Avison and Young, looking into the productivity aspects, and Arend, which is looking at furnitures. Now, we've been monitoring one of our offices on site for quite a long period of time, and we are about to publish the results. So I'll be happy to circulate the details of that publication when it comes out. Unfortunately, the refurbishment is not happening, but what we are doing is applying the principles on one of the buildings on what we call the Innovation Park on site. And hopefully when you're able to come and visit, then we would welcome your a visit from yourselves to have a look at what it might look like, and that should be ready in the autumn. We've been working also with a number of dissemination partners, so these trade associations are key to ensure that what we do is not replicating the work that's already been done, that we build on what can be done, and we also bring a study that is relevant to a large number of trades. So I was invited to this session thanks to our association with SIPSI, so thank you very much with this. So that's it for me.
Thanks. That's great. If anyone's got any questions, could they put them in the chat window, please, and we'll pick them up after the next two presentations. Our next presentation is from John Little and Duncan Kramer of Green Roof Shelters. Green Roof Shelters has been designing and producing green roof cycle parking and bin stores for 12 years. And John and Duncan are going to talk about connecting people to nature through these everyday structures and utilities. Over to you, 10 minutes.
Okay, so hi from me and hi from Duncan. We are from Green Roof Shelters, and I suppose we wanted to get across the importance of every tiny piece of infrastructure, every piece of design that goes into urban places. It really feels like the way things are going, we really need to make sure that habitat and plants or soils, anything like that, needs to be built into any. So every new design, whether it be a bridge or a bike shelter or a highways, is important to get we must get this kind of habitat in. So we were going to just quickly show roughly what we have been doing over the last sort of 12 years, and I've been doing certainly over the last 25 years. So this is what we were trying to say. So everything is an opportunity, really. So if you've got to have infrastructure, whether it be a bin shelter or a bike shelter or a bollard or a crash barrier, it feels to me like everything needs to be thought about, and there's chance to get niche habitat and plants and soils into these things, and we shouldn't miss the opportunity to do that, I guess. So this, essentially, is a habitat for invertebrates. It's got a place for plants, and lastly, it's got somewhere to put your bins, and that feels to me like an important thing to think about always when it comes to design. And then I think it's also very good to think about how you can use existing infrastructure. So some of these images are from the housing estate, social housing estate we've been looking after for the last 18 years. So using walls, using railings, using existing infrastructure, maybe to support, for instance, the poppies down the railings, the railings support that. They allow the thing to, the plants to be supported, and we can fix invertebrate habitats, railing, we can use walls, we can use gas pipes to grow hot plants up. So it's that kind of just using what you've got that's there, which I think sometimes we don't. And these can be simple fixes and simple things to do. Increasingly, thankfully, this message is getting out there. And we've just, in last November, I think, delivered 7 cycle shelters to the new IKEA. And now this has got a big green roof on it as well. But I think what's useful about the small structures is that these are up close to where people are. So these are in a scale that people can understand. They're somewhere that you can put interpretation about green infrastructure. You can, it's a great place for people to understand what's going on. Why is there plants on the roof? Why is there habitat on the walls? And of course, it's somewhere to put your bike. So I think if we can think about design going from, it's a bit like landscape design. I always think landscape design should be designed from the bugs back. So we look at what invertebrates we want to get, and then we design the landscape to suit that. And then everything rolls off of that. And I think it feels like it's such a small step to move from a bog standard bike shelter up to something that makes some sense from infrastructure point of view, but just has some sort of appeal. And the aesthetic of these things is really important, I think. If you're down at this scale and people are up close, it's the aesthetic, it's the logs, it's the natural materials. That's what grabs people and pulls them in. And I think we don't want to lose sight of that when we're designing SUDs and we're designing landscapes and we're designing buildings, or in this case, cycle shelters. The aesthetic and the appeal and the kind of catch to people of what it looks like is a really, really important thing. And then you can move on to all the other bigger stuff then. So I think the other thing that we that needs to be talked about more, well, there's lots of things, but one of the whole thing about how long things last. What does sustainable mean? And we've come across, there's so many things that are green, supposedly, that don't last. that don't have good maintenance, that don't make any sense over the long term. And we were slightly obsessive about making our structures, the frame of the whole thing, heavy galvanized steel, stainless steel trays to waterproof the roof, things that are going to last a long, long while. There might be a high energy input in the start, but these things are going to be here for a long, long while. And then around that kind of strong structure, we then add the habitat and the plants and all the fluffy stuff. So, but without that core of engineering and decent structure, it's like we're playing a bit of a game. So we need stuff to last. And the other thing, which interestingly is the fact that these are all delivered as one and are totally portable, straight off a lorry onto a lorry. So these things never need to be demolished. They can be sold on, they can be taken somewhere else, they can be moved. And I think that's something, portability is something that really taps into the sustainability thing. If you're going to have to demolish a building after it's used, then that's a sad thing and a lot of energy use gone. And this is an example. We delivered this, we convert shipping containers into green roof buildings, and we delivered this, I don't know, Duncan, 6 years ago?
Yeah.
So 6 years ago, and then they had to move. This is a charity, a wonderful charity down in Ramsgate, and they had to move their site. You know, they got kicked off. And they were able to take that building and then put it on a lorry and back over to a new site. And I think that's, I mean, there's a lot talked about portable buildings or buildings built off site, but I think the fact that a building can be moved and change use and change site without much disruption is really important, to be honest, and useful. And this is sort of getting back to what we were talking about of every little piece of infrastructure, street furniture. We need to be thinking about niches for stuff. Now, this was I'm lucky enough to have a big space where I live. So we trial loads of things where I live first to make sure it actually works. And it doesn't, we're not pretending. So this was an idea we had to make a sand planter. So this is a planter essentially with a skin of sand around it and a perforated steel edge on the left. Ground nesting bees. We've got plenty of, we put plenty of habitat in for whole nesting bees. We don't put much in. Loads of bees and wasps and other invertebrates love to nest in bare sand. And so this was a way we thought of actually getting sand into urban places without it becoming a sand pit. So on the left is what we've messed around with and trialed, and on the right is the kind of product version, as it were. So the bees nest in through the holes. This is filled with sand. The ground nesting bees nest in through the holes into the sand on the right, and then the aerial nesters nest in the holes drilled in the logs. And you can put plants in it. You know what I mean? So it's doing a job, but it's also doing the habitat thing at the same time. And I think that's a really important thing, because every piece of space is so precious now, especially in urban areas. We've got to make as much habitat and green space with what we've got left, which is increasing, we're basically decreasing, isn't it? We've got less and less space to do good things with. So we must make sure we do our absolute best with the stuff we've got, you know, at every opportunity. And we've been working with an entomologist. This is James, our amazing entomologist, looking very entomologist in that picture. And we have been really, it's been fascinating. As soon as we connected with this guy, everything we did sort of, well, some of it didn't make sense, but it suddenly became alive. And James can tell us what bugs we could attract, what's practical for us to build, to what bugs we can suit within an urban area, what is obviously what invertebrates need, two specialist conditions for us to think about. In other words, we start with James, like we were saying, and then we work back to the product. And I think that's not just for shelters and things. This is general landscaping. I mean, any new piece of landscape. And I think we really undervalue and underplay how good we can make a new landscape for wildlife. It is, we can create, with brownfields prove this. You know, we can make a place incredibly good for wildlife just by trashing it and leaving it alone for 40 years. It suddenly becomes a triple SI. Imagine if we could design it with care to make it do all those brownfield things, but do it as on purpose. How amazing that could be. And I think we really underplay that. And I understand, yeah, I'm running out of time. Okay, so just let me quickly see what again. So just quickly, sands and soils as substrates. So the potential for soils to become habitat is underplayed in landscapes. And this is where we trial it all. So I've been trialing sands, construction waste, all sorts of materials for plants, for habitat. And we use that on our shelters, and we use that within our landscaping as well. And I think this is a very, very big opportunity to do this stuff. And get habitat and get structure onto green roofs and into places. So plants are one thing, but habitat to nest in and for invertebrates, vitally important. And roofs are really cool places to do that. Let's not just lay out a seed and blanket everywhere. Let's put logs, let's put concrete, let's put piles of sand, let's do some stuff that creates structure on a roof. You know, plants are going to dry out maybe one time a year, but these things work all year round. And I've got a lot more stuff, but I'm running out of time, I understand. So we looked after social housing, and maintenance, I suppose, is the last thing. I shouldn't have made this the last thing to talk about. This should have been the first thing, really. So quality maintenance, thought about maintenance, brings places alive with decent maintenance. And because people are there regularly on site, they can adapt space to suit the people and the wildlife. And I think maintenance is again, it's a Cinderella of horticulture, and it shouldn't be. I think we're there. Well, there's lots more. Do you want me to start?
I'd actually love you to go on, because this is all absolutely fascinating. But I do think that
we're struggling for time. Yeah, okay.
that we do need to wind up. Thanks very much. I really enjoyed that, and it's given me a lot of new ways of thinking about things, which I think is really valuable. We're now going to move on to Joe Clancy and possibly Matt Croucher. I'm not entirely sure about this. Joe's principal landscape architect at WSP and has got lots of project experience incorporating natural stimuli into the built environment. And he's a co-author of Terrapin Bright Green's 14 Patterns of Biophilic Design. And he's going to talk about air quality in schools implementation for greening. Over to you.
Thanks so much. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Clancy, Assistant Landscape Architect at WSP, and here today to talk about the role in greening in the Mayor's School Air Quality Audit Programme. So, bit of project background to this. Over 400 London primary schools are located in areas which exceed legal pollution limits, with 25% of primary schools in areas with dangerously high levels of air pollution. So with this research, we know that road transport in London is responsible for nearly 50% of nitrogen oxides at roadside. A large part of that is diesels, which have recently been reclassified as grade 1 carcinogen, meaning they are definitely cause of cancer, and the World Health Organization groups diesel in the same categories as asbestos and mustard gas. Now, this led to the Mayor of London declaring London's dirty air as a public health emergency, and led to WSP being commissioned in 2017 to undertake audits into 50 primary schools in the most polluted areas in London. Now, the School Air Quality Audit Programme is led and funded by the Greater London Authority, and the total cost of the programme for the primary schools was 830k. And this included 10k starter grants awarded to participating schools to support the implementation of the audit's recommendations. So the aim of the audit was to encourage London boroughs to audit every school within an area of high pollution. And the programme has created a generic school air quality audit toolkit with over 100 measures, which can be used by any school, workplace, hospital, and other organisations. And following the success of this programme, the Mayor has extended it to 20 nurseries across the capital. That was launched in May 2018. Unfortunately, the monitoring of the results in terms of the implementation measures is currently being undertaken by some of the participating schools and wasn't within the scope of the audit programme, so I don't have this data at hand, but I do have information on how it was implemented and the wider benefits. So, as I was saying, audited 50 schools across London, aim to establish a robust process and toolkit of measures to be rolled out across the various boroughs and primary schools. And the toolkit includes 100 comprehensive measures ranging from hard-hitting to low-cost level approaches with more immediate effects. So with greening interventions, we're just going to caveat and emphasize that they have a low but positive impact in terms of air quality, and this impact and improvement in air quality is very locational and context specific. So just caveat that first, but I'll touch on that more in a bit. But aside from air quality, they also bring a lot of wider benefits, such as acoustics, biodiversity, and visual amenity. And from Flavia's earlier presentation, we've seen how scenes of nature and interaction with natural environments and stimuli reduce blood pressure and increase cognitive performance, very important for early learning environments. But going back to improving air quality, they work by reducing exposure to air pollution by blocking particulate matter and improving air quality. So generally, the thicker and denser the vegetative screen, the better. Studies have shown that a dense vegetation layer with a high leaf density can as much as halve the level of pollutions just behind the vegetative barrier, though this benefit trails off with increasing distance. So that goes back to my previous point on air quality improvements for being very location and context specific. This is more about than just tokenistic greenery or putting greenery within the space as well for improving air quality. It's very much the layout, the spatial configuring of the space, programming of the wider school grounds for play and outdoor learning to maximize those localized improvements in air quality, but also to minimize exposure to pollution both indoors and out at other locations throughout the school grounds. Other research and studies have shown that vegetative barriers can decrease pollution concentrations within the playgrounds by 23% from nitrogen oxides and 38% for particulate matter. One of the case studies that was audited as part of this program was St. Mary's Primary School in Chiswick, Hounslow. So in addition to the 10K Start grant, they secured significant additional funding through a campaign that was organized by a parents and teachers group that gathered a lot of local community support from politicians and celebrities, as well as the Mayor of London's office. And the result was a much large greening interventions. So this green wall you see on screen here is the largest ever installed at a school in the UK. It's made up of 12,000 plants and it's 126 meters long. And recent air monitoring of it has shown that it's increased local air quality by about 37%. Now, again, touching on the added value of greening schools going beyond improving air quality, school playground can be an important daily experience of nature for children. For some, it's the only experience of daily interaction with nature and green space they'll have. Before lockdown, we had research showing that 3/4 of children in the UK spend less time outdoors each day than prison inmates. And if we combine this with factors such as nearly half of the global population now lives at densities that are linked to higher instances of depression, and only 13% of that global population lives close enough to nature to reap the mental health benefits. This kind of underscores the importance of, green environments or green learning environments as well, as we know that experiences of nature have been shown to enhance mood, self-esteem, and productivity. But other benefits are, having childhoods full of interaction with nature allow the adoption of more pro-environmental behaviors for students when they become adults, everything from diet to transport, and even children who have childhoods with greater interaction with nature as adults, they're 25% more likely to volunteer in environmental stewardship schemes as adults. So this case study, St. Paul's C of E, Hammersmith and Fulham, they wanted to create a mini woodland using the Start grant as a space that the children could learn in, but also act as a barrier to the pollution. Now, in addition to the 10K Starter grant, they secured additional funding through the Trees for Cities program. As part of the woodland installation, staff and children attended workshops to make them aware of why the woodland was being installed and the issues around air pollution. So this took the issue of poor air quality surrounding the school, the response to improve air quality, and turning it into a medium for environmental education and ecological literacy. So they were just two of the case studies we showed to date. So the measures delivered to date, and this applies to the primary schools audit only. A lot of schools have been delivering measures involving awareness raising and behavior change, such as welcome packs and clean walking routes, but 35 out of the 50 schools have implemented measures relating to green infrastructure, such as ivy walls and green screens. And the redesign of these school grounds has focused largely on reducing exposure through green infrastructure, reducing time in exposed areas. So again, designing out use of the most polluted parts of the playground and taking advantage of the location of where those air purification measures through greening are located, and also promoting sustainable travel through additional cycle parking and training for children and parents. So 78% of the toolkit measures were projected to have relatively small impacts on air quality in isolation, but there are a package of quick win measures, lower impact, but in combination can contribute to making a more immediate improvement in air quality. And moving forward, as part of lessons learned from the Mayor's audit and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, we should be looking to expand the narrative outside of the school gates, as others have done. For example, Hackney's School Street Programme Toolkit, reducing traffic and creating safer, healthier streets. And again, this ties into more permanent interventions, combining energy, water, and biodiversity strategies with air quality interventions around school, as part of wider, more taking on board traffic calming, additional cycle infrastructure as well. This image on the screen there is from some of WSP's work for the City of Westminster as part of the Marylebone Low Emission Neighbourhood Scheme, where we retrofitted rain gardens as a measure of controlling surface water and also improving air quality and reallocating road space to make a safer environment for cyclists and pedestrians. And then finally, moving the conversation forward, so taking this work that has been done as part of the air quality audit program, can we expand the challenge on greening around schools and move beyond improving air quality to improving overall health, well-being, and equitable access to green space for everyone living in London, especially in these polluted areas? Taking for a goal or setting the bar, we have Paris. They've set the bold goal of converting 800 school grounds to double as green spaces by 2040. And these are also to be used by the public after school hours as a means of increasing access to green space, improving air quality, storing carbon, reducing runoff, and improving thermal comfort. That last point is in direct response to the 2017 heat wave, which hit Paris and Europe. Could London challenge itself to convert these 50 schools as part of the original audit, or even 100 schools, into green spaces, improving air quality, improving access to green space and such? Groundwork has been laid through various initiatives and toolkits outside of this one, though, by WSP, and we show how effective low-cost solutions can be and how the benefits can accumulate over time. And so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe. That was absolutely fascinating. Our next speaker is Professor Prashant Kumar, who's Professor and Chair in Air Quality and Health at the Surrey University and the founding director of the Global Centre for Clean Air Research. And Professor Kumar is going to talk to us about a new framework for green infrastructure implementation. Over to you. You may still be on mute.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. So, and introducing me. So I'll be just talking about, a little bit more about the green infrastructure and giving some, the engineering perspective to it. So just to start with a little bit about the team and the work we are doing in the area of green infrastructure, and then going into that how we are kind of translating this into some actionable document so that this could be more useful. So I'll start with the team. A lot of people involved in the work. A number of them are also there in this webinar, so they're listening. So thank you, everyone. And then to a number of the funders which has been supporting our research, which is coming from the number of UK reports, Horizon 2020, and international kind of funding bodies. But this also have been complementing or supporting directly or indirectly the research in this particular area. So For us, it was, kind of started as a curiosity in 2014 when we wanted to do something, and we thought, okay, let's try to look into the hedges around a road. And we did that these experiments where there is a very busy kind of a road, and then there is a traffic, the footpath around it, and there is a hedge between them. So we tried to kind of look into it, and then we found that these plants are really doing quite a lot of good things in terms of the reducing the exposure in near road environment. And since then we have published almost over 30 journal articles in top ranked journals, and some of the bits actually which were mentioned perhaps have been motivated through them, and that has attracted quite a lot of funding. And a number of these, the news articles which keep coming on the research. And more importantly, it has gone into a number of, the guidance documents, which has been kind of referred by the councils and the schools. So just to give a very brief kind of the introduction in terms of how the greening works, means that we know that we all love about the trees and the greening, and that should be basically the spirit. But the most important thing is that if you want to put them the right trees at the right place, or the right greening at the right place, then you could really exploit actually the best potential for them. For example, you can have the benefits of attracting the people into the green spaces, reducing the exposure on the roadsides, getting those leaves, depositing the particles onto them. But then they can also create actually the ozone formation, which is basically the emissions coming from the vehicles and in the presence of sunlight, and the VOCs actually, which is called the biogenic volatile organic compounds coming from the trees. So there could be kind of downsides as well. So it's very important actually to consider those things, so that there is a balance actually which has been made. So if you want to know a little more about this, so you can see this paper, or you can drop me an email. I can send you the copy where we talked about a number of those issues in there. But the most important thing is that how do you distinguish actually where you wanted to put the plants when it comes to the air quality improvements. So you can think of like two kind of situations where you got the street canyons, where you got the buildings on the side, and then those buildings might have like the different heights. So what you want is that if you got so this is kind of a flow what you're seeing from from these streamlines. So if you put the trees in there, depending on the height to width ratio, you can trap actually the pollutants, and you can make actually the things really worse. So there are the kind of suggestions in a way that what you wanted to put it in, so that you can get the benefit in terms of improving the air quality, but also not having the adverse impact of those installations. When it comes to the open road kind of environments where you don't have the buildings on the side, so it's not a rocket science to understand that if you got the traffic and if you have the wind coming through, then it's going to directly kind of expose to the people. But if you put these the barriers in the middle, then this kind of the protecting the people from the work. And one of these examples is that usually what you expect is the concentrations are very high on the road, and then they kind of decrease actually exponentially as you go up. So when you put the kind of green barrier in between, what you're doing is you are basically lowering this concentration profile, because what it's doing is it's kind of acting as a filter in terms of reducing those particle matter concentration, or these the pollutants which is coming from the vehicles. So you mentioned about this 50% reduction actually that comes from this study. So this is arising from this work which was taken care in Guildford, where we had experimented actually a number of these roadside vegetations, which included hedges, trees, or trees with hedges, and we kind of see actually what kind of reductions you are seeing. So depending on different pollutants and the traffic conditions and so on, and how close these barriers are, you can see actually a positive impact that could vary from the few tens of percent going up to almost over 50%. Now this is another very recent work which clearly demonstrates actually the impact of the seasons, and this is almost for the first time that we were able to capture the full seasonal variation of a hedge. So what you are seeing, this black line actually is showing you how the concentrations looks like when you have in the dormancy stage, where the leaves are kind of dry. And then you could see that in the second figure where the things go a little green, and then on the last one when go fully green, then you can see this hockey kind of, the trend. And this is what is telling you is that you can also think in terms of what kind of the species or what kind of hedges you want you to put in, because on certain time of the year you might not get actually the benefit which you are intending to get from these installations. We keep going further basically. So we have recently produced a framework where we can do the modeling for the green infrastructure, but using the air pollution models. So we try to kind of come up with an idea that how we can use the air pollution models, which can allow us to estimate actually what impact would be. But what happens is that in the roadside conditions, you can get a quite high concentration reduction, but on this city scale, the reductions are a few %. And so this is also a point that if you're looking the green infrastructure, just that it will solve the problem, this is not gonna really be be the solution of everything. So there is always a choice in terms of what you wanted to do and where you want to do. So what we did is then we tried to kind of translate this research into some actionable the guidance document. So this was the first ever guidance on the green infrastructure, which was published by the City Hall a couple of years back. So we were contributing to this one and brought the concept of this open road and street, the conditions. Because sometimes what happens is that people do confuse by thinking, not considering actually the aspect that the flow of the airflow basically can make a huge difference to the things when it comes to the reducing the infrastructure. Then what we did is then we went on further, and this was released last year. So we have been running a Guildford Living Lab where we are interacting with the local councils, with the community, with the schools, and so on. And when we were doing the the brainstorming sessions with them, so one thing which came out quite clearly was that there is nothing which allows actually people to make decisions, and we need actually some kind of a document which can also give more information in terms of how you can manage these plant species and what kind of species you want to bring in. So this is freely available. If somebody's interested, just let us know, and or you can do Google it, you can find it. And then what came out actually further was that how do we take it further? So in the previous presentations, you see a lot of biodiversity issues, and that remains here as well in terms of what kind of a species you wanted to put in, because you don't want to put one type of a species. So you wanted to have a species. So what we did in this particular, the work where we kind of created a framework where we looked into the influential traits of almost, tens of, the species. So to look into, for example, how good, these trees or the plants could be for the air pollution tolerance, how good they could be from the maintenance perspective, whether they are a low pollen emissions, whether they are a low biogenic volatile organic compounds emissions. So we looked into these different traits and tried to come up with a kind of a list actually, which can allow to pick point at least some of them. So there is no one fixed answer depending on your choice, but then at least we kind of refine this search. And this is the work which just came out actually this week. So you might see in the news actually, where we looked into the deposition of the leaves, and we can also see that when you have the leaves on the traffic facing side, where you can see on the left side, and this is the leaves on the right side actually, which is on the back. So the pollution, it's basically, these hedges are really taking a toll on their health actually to protect the people. So you can see the
unknown
health of,
participant is now exiting.
So what we are currently doing is then we are now integrating everything into a tool, which we call it a HashDate. So it's not a kind of a dating app. It's a tool where you can design your apps, so your hedges or your green infrastructure. So at the moment, what we're doing is we are trying to combine actually all this knowledge into something which could be used by the practitioners or the consultants or environmental groups or whoever is basically interested in. So we are open for collaboration on this, in this area of work. So if there is somebody interested, in here, just drop me an email. But apart from that, then we got a large project which is called Nature Operandum. So we are also looking into the nature-based solutions in order to come up with the strategies for the hydrometeorological risk. and some work through the Inhale project, where currently we are doing some measurements in London, where we're looking into the street scale greening. So yeah, so this is it basically. So thank you very much. This is my last slide. You got my email here. And just
Excellent.
to say that.
Yeah, sorry, I think thanks very much. That was an absolutely fascinating talk. Just to say to everybody, there's a lot of interesting stuff coming through on the chat, people pointing at various helpful resources. We will be collating all those and circulating them with the slides after the event. I'm really finding it fascinating how all these different speakers are picking up on so many of the same themes, which is great. And then our final speaker in this segment is Robert Winch from the UK Green Building Council, where he's Sustainability Officer. And he's going to be talking about the UK GBC's work on its new vision for climate resilience through nature-based solutions, and also which I'll be particularly interested in, a project exploring innovative financing mechanisms. Over to you, Robert. And we're running behind time, so do please keep it down to your 10 minutes or less. Thank you. And you're still on mute, by the way. Robert, you're still on mute. See if I can unmute you somehow. Can't hear Robert, who is on mute. I can't unmute him. No, Robert, you're still on mute. I don't know if you can hear us. Possibly not. I think what I'm going to have to do is to take some of the questions we've been having. Oh, Robert's now disappeared entirely. One thing, we've had a lot of comments actually on both to talking about the. Oh, Robert, can we hear you now?
Can you?
We can now. Yes, you were on mute for a long time. We didn't hear a thing you said.
Okay, I don't know what happened. I just ended up restarting. Okay, anyway, you can hear me now. That's good.
So if you go on, and if you can really try and keep it as brief as possible, that would be great. Thanks.
Even quicker now.
Yeah.
Can you see my slides?
We can see your slides. Yes.
Okay, great. Everyone, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. As we said, I'm Rob Winch, Sustainability Officer at the UK Green Building Council. So I lead on much of our work on climate resilience and nature. So thank you very much for inviting me to join you on this webinar. I'm going to very quickly run through who we are for those of you that have not yet come across us. We're an industry-led network with a mission to radically improve the sustainability of the built environment. So we're a charity member with over 450 members, spanning the entire value chain of the built environment. Oh, can you still see my slides?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay.
Just carry on. Just carry on quickly.
No, I think that's someone else's screen.
I think on my.
Sorry, Robert. Would you just take control of the thing again?
It won't let me request control. Yeah, trying to sort it. How about now?
You got it.
Absolute disaster. Anyway, so we're a charity with over 450 member organisations. You see here a few of these, and we really try and inspire and challenge and empower our members to help them adopt the most sustainable, viable solutions. So for the past year and a half, we've been looking at how nature can be used to create climate resilient assets and generate environmental net gains, because we see nature as a multifunctional solution to achieve both of these goals. So a lot of the benefits of nature come inherently when creating space for it, but when design considerations are given to the way nature is used, it can actually create more climate resilient buildings and infrastructure. So we see this vision here set out by the Wildlife Trust as being one our urban environment should aspire to. It shows a very different landscape compared to the normal. So it's possible to create urban environments, urban cooling through street trees, which can mitigate the urban heat island effect through shading and evapotranspiration. That are flood responsive through blue and green infrastructure, which can manage water flow through channeling and increase soil stability and enhance water absorption. Can also create living landscapes that benefit nature itself through increase in genetic exchange between populations, subsequently making more climate resilient and disease resilient species. But even with knowledge of these solutions, nature is unfortunately still in decline and the climate is still changing. From conversations we had with our members and stakeholders across the industry, it was clear there needs to be an ambition to aim for on these topics, something to really contextualise what's being worked towards. So last year we created an ambition statement through a process of research and stakeholder engagement. And it was through this process we're able to really widen our network and understand the stakeholders in this space and build strong ties with them. Obviously, example is the London Climate Change Partnership, as well as building stronger ties with DEFRA and the Wildlife and Countryside Link, amongst many others. So this is the ambition we came up with. And I'll obviously let you read that yourself, but alongside this ambition, we launched a short report which explains the statement in detail and the reasoning behind each element of it. So if you're interested to find out more about this, you can find it on our website, and it really sort of explains a bit more about the sort of scope of this ambition. And it was since the launch of this ambition that we sought to understand how we can help our members and wider industry actually work towards this goal. UK GBC's large membership base actually provides us with a really unique convening power to help bring together all these desperate parties in the construction value chain and start to stimulate a real and practical shift towards sustainable principles. And to do this, we've now launched a new 2-year programme called Increasing Nature-Based Solutions. So this programme is possible thanks to 65k funding from the John Ellerman Foundation, and it really aims to enable more ambitious targets related to nature-based solutions, climate resilience and environmental net gains, and to increase the application of nature-based solutions in urban areas. So to meet these quite ambitious outcomes, in year 1, we're going to create a framework for increasing nature-based solutions, very much tying back into industry's attainment of that ambition statement I mentioned. And this will be a set of recommendations structured around key themes, which organisations can use as guidance for how to make their buildings and assets more climate resilient and to create environmental net gains through the use of NBS. So the audience will primarily be developers, owners, operators and occupiers of buildings and infrastructure. And then in year 2, we're going to create a guide on the innovations taking place around nature-based solutions. So we'll compile a mixture of existing innovations and start to actually generate new innovations, hopefully through a sort of hackathon style events. So we won't be creating these resources alone. Anyone who's familiar with UK GDC will know that we're very collaborative, and we do a lot of this through stakeholder engagement. We're going to be interviewing industry experts, running summer workshops, and we've now actually formed our nature-based solutions steering group, which you can see here. So we really received a much larger number of applications than expected. So it was a real challenge to actually narrow it down to these 14 individuals. And we aim to make these up of a really diverse mix from industry with significant experience and knowledge in this space. So really pleased to have these guys helping us. And all of these activities that I mentioned before are ones you can likely get involved in yourself. If you're interested, please do drop me an email. We have an interest group mailings, so you can stay up to date on our work in this space and the opportunities to get involved. So another project I'm going to really quickly mention that we're working on is the Ignition project. So this is a project that aims to develop innovative financing solutions for investment in Greater Manchester's natural environment. The project's ambition is to actually create a 10% increase in Greater Manchester's urban green infrastructure coverage by 2038. And this investment is really going to help build the city region's ability to adapt to the increasingly extreme impacts of climate change. It's a project backed by 4.5 million euros from the EU's Urban Actions Initiative and brings together 12 partners from local government, universities, NGOs and business. So of course, UKGBC being one of those. And the aim here is to develop the first model of its kind that enables major investment in large scale environmental projects for the purpose of increasing climate resilience. And this gives you a really quick overview of the sort of project components. I won't dwell too much on this, but really it's all about starting to develop business models, funding mechanisms, and then using this to build investor confidence. Also creating a living lab as well, similar to the University of Surrey, but this is very much a test bed and demonstration of nature-based solutions, and they sort of measure the outcomes of those and delivering these mechanisms into the real world is sort of the end stage here. So we know that investment in nature-based solutions is much lower than we would like, and we hope that by providing a foundation of quantifiable benefits, it will allow for the identification of investment opportunities. And to start to achieve this, the project team at Business in the Community and the Greater Manchester Combined Authority researched over 1,000 evidence items across 5 urban nature-based solution databases and measured 12 key benefits to really start to compile a real strong evidence base for nature-based solutions. So you can see here just some of the headline findings from this. That urban green space in direct proximity to property can result in a 9.5% increase in value. And you can see a 15% increase in productivity of workers in green environments. You can get a 4 to 15 decibels of noise reduction, and up to a 50% increase in the willingness of individuals to spend within central business districts when using street trees. So the next steps here to make real strong use of these findings is to create a platform where this raw data is actually going to be open source and accessible to all, to use this information and to inform further research at University of Surrey's Living Lab. Start to engage citizens in these findings and help develop that change in their perception. And we at UKGBC are working with BITC and GMCA to turn this resource into an industry accessible format. So that's likely to be launched late in the summer. We'll also be creating comms materials that can be widely shared and used by industry. It's really about getting that information out there in a really easy to digest format. And we see this resource really being used beyond just the Ignition project itself. It's going to hopefully inform the selection and expected benefits of organisations of nature-based solutions, start to inform that decision-making and the policy made by government, and really reduce the time spent of individuals and organisations looking to find that evidence and start to bring together the evidence in a transparent and accessible way. So that was a really quick overview of these 2 big projects, and sorry for the initial hiccup with the technical problems. Please do get involved, and thanks for listening.
That was great. Thank you very much. So we've heard about a huge range of things in these talks so far, ranging from the comparatively small scale to the comparatively large scale. People have been asking some quite technical questions, most of which have been actually answered in the chat, and we will be circulating the information in the chat afterwards. So I'm not going to pick up on those questions again. But what a theme that has come up a couple of times in some of the questions, especially from you, Duncan and John, but I suspect other people may have something to say on this. And it's all about involving communities in the process and how you can actually do that in practice. And you're on mute.
Okay, I'm fine. Okay. Well, I think it's tricky. It's just tricky, and I think we've tried two approaches on the housing estate that we work on. We either do something on a small scale quickly and easily without much consultation, and then when it's in full flow or full bloom or whatever it is, when there's something to show for it, then do the main consultation and just say, you know, is this something you like? Is this good? And because it's really difficult to, you know, this whole thing of standing outside and with a gazebo handing out leaflets, it reaches a tiny demographic. It really rarely reaches a mixture of who you want it to do. So we've often found that just doing something on a smaller scale, a version of what you might want to do on a bigger scale, works really, really well. And of course, going back to the maintenance thing, changing
Unknown participant is now exiting.
changing the specification for maintenance, getting the specification, getting community into grounds maintenance specification, for instance, changing that is key, because maintenance people can be incredibly good community people because they're there regularly. They know people, and the people are much more inclined to talk to you if you're looking after green space than you are if you're an inspector or a housing officer. So I think we underplay the usefulness of decent quality grounds maintenance. And I know on the estate we've just finished after 18 years, but they've asked us to write the new contract. So as a contractor, we've written the new contract for the new contractors, which is rather lovely. So we've now written all this into the new specification, and a big company is now looking after it. So I'm really excited to see if that works for a big company.
And do you get much sort of spontaneous feedback? I mean, do people complain, oh, you're not keeping the grass short enough and that sort of thing?
That's the joy of it, because you're there, you can respond. And we look after different blocks. We have a sort of level of tidiness that works with depending on the block. And that's the intimacy of being there regularly. You can never get that if you turn up as an outside designer and suddenly want to change something, you know what I mean? So I think one is, if you're going to redesign a space, talk to the maintenance people for sure before you start designing, and two, design to suit the maintenance that's going to be there for sure, because otherwise what you're doing is a bit pointless. There's thousands of community gardens been built and school wildlife gardens been built, and then there's a £10 an hour maintenance guy left to look after it, and that happens constantly. So there's that, you know, we need to have a much tighter connection between people that care for spaces, basically.
Joe, I wonder if you have anything to say on this community involvement thing. Did you find that sort of bringing new things into the schools, how does that affect the communities that the schools are in, if at all? Is Joe still here? Because if so, he might still be on mute.
Sorry, I pressed the mute button on my microphone. I have to press it on the app as well. Apologies. I think Matt would, Kosher, my colleague, would be better placed to answer that question directly on the schools. In terms of more broadly, in terms of community engagement, in terms of biodiversity and introducing nature-based or kind of wilder aesthetics, we found there is a bit of tension in terms of trying to green spaces and bring spaces that are biodiverse, and they tend to be wilder, and grass tends to be longer. And tying in with your previous question there, some people don't like these wilder green spaces. They think they're messy, and what we're finding is that some people won't use these spaces. And this goes into not just personal preference, but it can even affect some communities or some demographics, depending on cultural backgrounds and stuff like that, that we all have different special preferences and aesthetics or ideas of what nature is. And simply the fact is that we all value nature, but we all interact it in different ways. But if spaces and the green spaces that they're in, or the green spaces they contain, don't respond to those needs, we won't use them. So it's kind of that tension of how do you create spaces that address biodiversity, flooding, and everything else, but also still attract people who want to use them, so they can still have those mental health benefits as well. So that's just more kind of broader question. Probably raises more questions than answers, but that's something that we have come across, and it's just again another point of understanding for community engagement.
Thank you. Matt, did you have anything to add on that?
I don't think Matt actually might not be on the call.
Might not be on the call. In that case, he's not going to be adding anything, is he?
Could I just add a small thing on that about the wildness thing? We found that it's the food growing and the food thing that pulls the other chunk of the community into the green space. That's a really, really useful tool in comparison to just telling them they need biodiversity. Give them somewhere to grow food and provide space to grow food. That's a very biodiverse space anyway. And that's what a lot of the community on our estate responded to incredibly well.
That's great. I think most of the other questions have already been picked up on in the chat. So thanks to everyone, all the speakers who've been doing that. Kristen is reminding us that for the more technically minded people, we have another short event tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the use of remote sensing to understand vegetation health. And there's a link in the chat that will tell you about that, which brings us quite nicely, I think, or possibly quite nicely, onto our next speaker, who's Bryony Turner from Space for Climate. She's Climate Services Development Manager at Space for Climate and co-founder of the MESH Climate Services Network. And she's going to talk to us about highlights from across the network. I have to say, I'm not entirely sure which network she's going to be giving us highlights from, but I expect she'll tell us. Thanks, Bryony.
That's okay. So hi everyone. I think I'm sharing my screen and I might have rather inexpertly shared my PowerPoint. So just let's just keep it as it is because I think everyone can hear me, so that's a good thing. So I'm going to talk to you actually about one of the activities of the Space for Climate group, but before I do, I wanted to mention that the Space for Climate group has co-founded with GCAP a network called MESH, which is Networking for the Climate Services Community. And what we were finding and where this came from was that we were going to international conferences like Adaptation Futures and ECHA, for some of you that know the European version, and finding that there was amazing climate expertise, and particularly climate adaptation expertise in the UK. And we really needed to spend those precious air miles that were involved being able to work with our international partners and not spend the time discovering expertise on our own doorstep. So a few of us basically came back and thought we'll do something about it, and we created MESH, which is meshclimate.net, and in a moment I'll pop it in the chat. That helps to connect UK expertise in climate action right from those that might be producing data to those that are working with data and information to actually risk assess and inform decisions, and even those that are involved in the decisions. So one of the elements of that kind of supply chain that we have in the UK, we really have some world leading expertise sort of across the kind of climate services community. And we tend to export our skills, as many of you will know, and particularly those involved in London Climate Change Partnership. At the Space for Climate group, which is what I coordinate and what hosts that MESH network I was telling you about, we actually represent UK expertise, and we really do have in this country world leading expertise in climate satellite data. And those of you working on plants and green infrastructure will know that weather and climate data is incredibly important for actually understanding vegetation health and accurately planning and designing good diverse habitat, which needs to take account of our changing climate. We've probably not got too much time to go into our climate change scenarios, but just a little bit, because sometimes we forget about climate change. We think about vegetation, what we could do now. We've had a lot of comment about it's not just about what looks nice, but about the biodiversity. So we do need to think about that in terms of the kind of operational lifetime. Great that we can port some of this green infrastructure. I always loved the work of John Little. The UK has had the 10 warmest years since 1884, from 2002. And whilst the projections are showing an increased chance of hotter, drier summers and an increase in frequency and intensity of extremes, we also need to think about things like changing rainfall and intensity of rainfall and winter drought as well as summer drought. And these types of things, particularly their impacts on soil moisture, can really impact vegetation health. Now, it happens that with satellite data, particularly something called land surface temperature data and soil moisture data, these are two areas that are really, really helpful for understanding vegetation health. So I've not got much time today. There's an event that's happening tomorrow where you can really hear much more technical detail. But what I wanted to let you know was that the Space for Climate group are working with the London Climate Change Partnership to actually see if we can build initially an open source vegetation health and climate resilience index, a kind of tool for those that are involved in the design but also the maintenance of vegetation infrastructure in London, and particularly we identified the leisure industry. We tend to think about parks when we're talking about green infrastructure often, or the assumption immediately goes to that. But when you think about things like Lord's Cricket Ground, Wimbledon Tennis, our Crown Estate, Kew Gardens, we've got a lot of big biodiverse spaces that really want to keep healthy, and they can give us lots of functions in terms of adapting the city to climate change. We talk about ecosystem services. I think that's been mentioned already. We talked a lot about helping with air quality, but also you can, if you can retain soil moisture, you may or not realize it, that can help retain asbestos fibers in the ground. So if we get very dry, dusty ground, that's not so good. So there are all sorts of things that having a really healthy green infrastructure across the city, not just in London, but across the country, can be important. So how do we actually not just do the planning of that, but actually make sure we've got the tools for the maintenance of that? I won't go into the detail, but basically we're looking at creating an index. There's a lot of open source satellite data, which doesn't give high spatial resolution, but does give a lot of information on vegetation stress. And using land surface temperature data and soil moisture data, you can actually detect when vegetation is distressed before you visually see it. So we're looking at, can we start to use these indexes perhaps to, yes, help with climate risk disclosure, which investors will be interested in, and Space for Climate Group members have produced things like EcoActuary, which has test nature-based solutions, and if they're going to help address drought and flooding and things like that. And do look at our website and explore it. But you know, can we actually work together and be at the forefront here to actually create tools that can actually help those that are maintaining the most important space for the public to enjoy, and also to attract and keep the leisure and services economy going. And that happens whether or not we have a global pandemic. We still need to keep our vegetation healthy if we want it to provide the biodiversity functions and the health benefits that you've all been talking about today. So just this is a quick shout out, do join us tomorrow. My last slide in a moment just shows the timings, but also if you manage land in London, or you are planning or designing green infrastructure interventions, and perhaps you're involved in a sports facility, a heritage visitor attraction, perhaps you are managing brownfield land and interim brownfield land spaces, and could see the benefit of having this type of index so that you could monitor and track against the benefit of the change as well as manage the land, then please could you get in touch with us. I'll leave my email address in a moment. Because we're really early days with this index, and we want to start from actually what the data needs are. And I think the last thing I just want to say from the Space for Climate Group's perspective is, with this type of index, we will initially set out with what data is available, but because we want to understand what data is actually needed, we've also got the opportunity to influence new sensor designs and new satellites that are going up, so that we might have to do some workarounds at the moment, but that we can actually get the data that you need in the future. So the Space for Climate Group have 2 more weeks in London, London Climate Change Week, with the LCCP, the support of LCCP. They're a fantastic partnership. You can get lots from it. So if you're based in London, think about joining the partnership. So as I mentioned on Friday, which is tomorrow, so much going on, we've actually got a session which some of you might find interesting on climate risk disclosure, which the Chartered Banking Institute are hosting. It's free to join, you have to sign up. You can go to our website to the events and get a direct link. That's actually at midday, and that will give you a real introduction to satellite data, right from satellite missions and data sets through to some of the tools I've talked about, like EcoActuary. Then we've actually got this event tomorrow, which is specifically about this vegetation health index. We'll also be hearing, I know from Russell, from the BASIS, from the Sustainability Association for the sports industry. So if you want more technical detail and to hear and ask questions to the actual remote sensing experts rather than me, then do join us at 3 till 4 p.m. Tomorrow. So lastly, do make a note of the general email address. I'm Bryony, and I will pop the event links into the chat now. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bryony. That's absolutely great. Just a reminder to everybody that we will be circulating all the information that's in the chat afterwards. We've got about 7 minutes left for any further questions. If anyone would like to put any questions into the chat. We have had a theme. Bryony, do you think you could stop sharing your screen? We have had a theme. People have been talking about air quality and noise reduction and you know, helping with asbestos and all sorts of different things. So all this can have multiple effects. I wonder if one question we have had is, does it actually do anything to actually reduce our emissions or our net emissions? For example, does it form any part of carbon capture if we can increase essentially the volume of biomass, especially in our urban areas? Prashant, maybe do you have anything to say on that? Maybe he does, but he's still on mute, or maybe I picked the wrong person to ask this question, to answer this question. Do any of our other speakers have any comments on this one?
Can I just, oh, sorry. I just wanted to say, I mean, for me, it's interesting because we're all kind of trying to find some characteristics for plants and how they can improve and kind of justify why we should use them. But I think actually, as human beings, we do know that we react well psychologically to plants. In Japan, the doctors prescribe a walk in nature to reduce stress. In the UK, it's something that's starting to come as well. And I think it's kind of, it's where we come from, nature. So I think, you know, it's also good to consider plants for what they are and the fact that they are aesthetically more pleasing probably than just concrete and asphalt. And so we maybe don't need to justify as much as we sometimes try to, although it's great and it's interesting and that's what gets people going, but sometimes try to justify things a bit too far maybe.
Well, yes, and I mean, you know, mental health is certainly as important as physical health in many ways. So, of course, if it helps that's good. Does anyone have any other questions or any comments they'd like to make? Do any of our speakers have any comments they'd particularly like to follow up on? Because I know you were all a bit rushed.
One thing that I found quite interesting is the bit of work that's being done at Newcastle University about carbon capture in urban soils and how urban soils can be better than highly organic soils for carbon capture due to the concrete and calcium in them. That's quite nice. I mean, that goes back to the importance of brownfield sites.
Yeah.
I am slightly biased about this, obviously, but the importance of brownfield sites in general, and also how new or damaged landscapes can become incredibly important for wildlife if we just, you know, think about them, I guess.
Yeah. Another thing that another slight theme that's emerged is that there were quite a lot of comments during and after Flavie's presentation about the need to actually do some get good quantitative data on actual improvements that were provided by some of these initiatives. And I know that that's something that's coming up with Rob's work, especially on the financing point, because you know, people tend to want to see concrete results from their investments. And do you have anything to add on that, Rob?
Yeah. So I guess linking to that is definitely this bit of evidence-based research that we've been, I guess, working with BITC and GMCA. So they've, as I was kind of mentioning quite quickly in my presentation, reviewed a whole lot of the various scientific journals and grey literature to compile the different research that exists already. And then we've translated this into what we'll make open source, so all the sort of data that's been collected, and also a very sort of industry friendly glossy report to demonstrate sort of the high-level findings. So, I guess like the specifics of what the air quality improvement would be, or the water quality improvement, or the thermal insulation, all these different aspects, and compile that into one place, as well as showing the different sort of costings, approximations for different nature-based solutions. So hopefully that gives industry a very quick way of finding what's best for their needs and what they're looking to achieve. And then that sort of, I guess, links as well to the University of Salford Living Lab, where they're going to continue to actually test and find new bits of evidence to support that further. And I'm sure there's going to be lots more research that's keeping that database live as a live repository. So we'll be continuing to build it up. So if there's any data that people sort of find, we can just add that into there.
That's great, thanks. Well, thanks to everyone. Thanks especially to all our speakers who've given us an absolutely fascinating hour and a half. I know I've learnt a lot. Kristen, would you just like to talk about any next steps?
Hi, yeah, just to say, again, thanks to all of the speakers. That was really good stuff. And yeah, and to all the people who came along and have sat through that for this long. Really appreciate it. It's not always easy with these online meetings. Yeah, so thanks very much. We will collect all the stuff that's been noted in the chat. So thanks for adding that. And the stuff that people have been talking about, like the Newcastle research and stuff like that, we'll dig that up and we'll include that in the notes. So we'll put everything together and send it out to you. We've mentioned the vegetation health event that's going on tomorrow, and I see there's been a little flurry of people registering for that, so that's really cool. And yeah, I mean, effectively, I think we'll be, circulating something to you, but we'll also get in touch if there are, potentially themes or issues coming out of some of what we've heard. And we might think we want to do more on it, like maybe something in further depth about community engagement or, some of the kinds of issues that have come up. So if you're happy to be contacted about those kinds of things, that's great. If you're not, let me know. That's fine too. And yeah, otherwise I think that's it for me. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Kristen, for organising all this. I know that you put a lot into it over the last couple of weeks to get this off the ground, as it were. Thanks very much, as I said, to our speakers and, of course, to all our guests, participants, I'm not quite sure, audience, whatever one calls them on these online meetings. Do remember that the LCCP, the London Climate Change Partnership, we are always interested in talking to organisations based in and around London or elsewhere who are interested in contributing towards how London adapts to climate change. And do get in touch with Kristen if you'd like to talk to us more about that. So thanks very much to everybody. A great event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.